There's a famous play called Our Town by the American playwright Thornton Wilder. Maybe you know it. One of the characters in it is a young woman named Emily Webb. And spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the play and don't wish to know what happens, I guess stop listening now. But anyway, she dies. But she gives this great soliloquy after her death in which she travels back in time to a day 14 years earlier. She can see her home and her family, but she can't speak to them, and they can't see her. In the monologue, Emily is basically bidding farewell to life, naming all the things she's going to miss most. And it's all really basic stuff. Mom and dad, hot baths, freshly ironed dresses, the sound of clocks ticking, food and coffee, sleeping and waking up. And then comes the real clincher. She says, "Oh, Earth, you're too wonderful for anybody to realize you." I first heard these words when I was 17 or 18, and I was immediately both horrified and fascinated by this idea that if we were somehow able to see our lives after the living of them was over, we might see that the best things about them were the things that basically come with life. That for all of our striving and fretting and planning and achieving, our highlight reel might end up being nothing but taking showers, eating food, and drinking coffee in the morning. That what seem like neutral experiences to us might appear extraordinary from the other side. We might call these things life's simple pleasures or creature comforts, but some would argue that these are the only real pleasures we ever experience, the ones that come through the body, through the senses. We're often too preoccupied to even notice these things. We might be remotely aware of the feeling of water on our skin when we're in the shower, or of the flavor of lettuce leaves when we're eating a sandwich. But our minds are usually elsewhere, planning out the day's schedule, thinking of what to say next, looking ahead to something better. But it's not totally our fault. It's hard to be sensitive to subtler flavors and feelings in a world that is always trying to outstimulate itself. Today, we are talking about what it means to come to our senses, to gather our senses, and how that opens up new possibilities for enjoyment, lingering, and so much more. I'm Ellen Riccio, and this is First Creatures. For me, there's no better symbol for our collective decline in sensitivity as a society than the humble orange. Here is an exotic piece of citrus, unless you live in a place where they grow on trees, of course, that kids used to be lucky to get once a year in their stocking, but which is now the least exciting item in every kid's lunchbox. They're ubiquitous, they're affordable, they're whatever. But it's more or less the same fruit that was such a delicacy 100 years ago, isn't it? How can a fruit that has so much to offer, visually, aromatically, texturally, tactilely, not to mention flavor-wise, go practically unnoticed by us? How can we be meh about a fruit that would have made our great-grandparents' mouths water? But it is just an orange. we might be inclined to feel sorry for those children for whom it was the most deluxe item they would receive all year. But let's not rule out the possibility that they should be feeling sorry for us. We, who have so much, who have access to all manner of fruits and vegetables at all times of year, who can order just about anything imaginable and it will appear on our doorstep within hours, who have available to us more entertainment than we could consume in a lifetime, yet who have trouble enjoying any of it. We might enjoy the first bite of a sweet dessert, but then the pleasure fades. Every once in a while, I come across a piece of writing from several decades ago that bemoans the then-current state of affairs regarding technology and its impact on our behavior and well-being, and I'm struck by how much more relevant it is today. I shudder to think how the author would feel now if they were still alive. I find myself talking back to the page saying, "You think that's bad?" One such passage comes from a book called The Wisdom of Insecurity by Alan Watts, which is one of my favorite books, by the way, so I'm sure this is but the first of many times I'll reference it on this podcast. For context, this book was published in 1951. Here, Watts is calling into question our so-called high standard of living, which he says amounts to, quote, a violent and complex stimulation of the senses, which makes them progressively less sensitive and in need of yet more violent stimulation. He continues, we crave distraction, a panorama of sights, sounds, thrills, and titillations into which as much as possible must be crowded in the shortest possible time. Alan Watts didn't just see the writing on the wall. He felt that the calamity was already here. It's almost comical when you think about the fact that people were just listening to the radio and gathering around their black and white television sets after dinner with the whole family. I mean, those were the days, am I right? But Alan Watts could see that technological advances that allowed for faster, louder, brighter, instantaneous, and on-demand stimulation of our senses were only making us more insatiable. The trouble, as he saw it, was that with this kind of stimulation, we're trying to please our brains, and that trying to please your brain is like trying to drink through your ears. The brain can never be satisfied like the stomach can. Its thirst cannot be quenched. It's always looking ahead to the next thing, needing some kind of assurance of future fun, or future safety, or future sustenance. But when the moment it is looking forward to finally arrives, whether it's the fun time, that next meal, or the coveted job offer, Watts says that the brain does not look the moment in the eyes, but is instead staring fixedly over its shoulder. Thus, according to Watts, we are increasingly incapable of real pleasure, insensitive to the most acute and subtle joys of life, which are in fact extremely common and simple. This observation makes me think of Emily Webb from our town, and it also makes me think of the 33 happy moments of Qin Shengtan. Qin Shengtan was a Chinese writer who lived near the end of the Ming Dynasty, or the 17th century. At one point, Qin found himself stranded in a temple with a friend for 10 days during a bout of heavy rainfall, and to pass the time, the two of them decided to compile a list of the truly happy moments in life. Reading this list is delightful. The moments Qin describes are surprisingly relatable, even though, by all outward appearances, his life was very different from ours. I'll just read you the first one so you can get an idea. Here it is. It is a hot day in June, when the sun hangs still in the sky, and there is not a whiff of wind or air, nor a trace of clouds. The front and back yards are hot like an oven, and not a single bird dares to fly about. Perspiration flows down my whole body in little rivulets. There is the noonday meal before me, but I cannot take it for the sheer heat. I ask for a mat to spread on the ground and lie down, but the mat is wet with moisture, and flies swarm about to rest on my nose and refuse to be driven away. Just at this moment, when I am completely helpless, suddenly there is a rumbling of thunder, and big sheets of black clouds overcast the sky and come majestically on like a great army advancing to battle. Rainwater begins to pour down from the eaves like a waterfall. The perspiration stops. The clamminess of the ground is gone. All flies disappear to hide themselves, and I can eat my rice. Ah, is this not happiness? This is how each description of a happy moment ends, with the refrain, "Ah, is this not happiness?" Notably, something that nearly all 33 happy moments have in common is that they're unexpected. They're not things that can be bought or planned or switched on. They're spontaneous, serendipitous, surprising, well beyond human control. Another thing they have in common is that they are, well, common. These kinds of moments happen in all of our lives, not just the especially lucky ones. Noticing them, it turns out, is the trick. The refrain, "Ah, is this not happiness?" happens to be the exact same sentiment expressed by Kurt Vonnegut's uncle. Let me explain. There's a quote that often gets attributed to Vonnegut himself, but he's actually paying tribute to his late Uncle Alex. In his book, A Man Without Country, Vonnegut says about his Uncle Alex, his principal complaint about other human beings was that they so seldom noticed it when they were happy. So, when we were drinking lemonade under an apple tree in the summer, say, and talking lazily about this and that, almost buzzing like honeybees, Uncle Alex would suddenly interrupt the agreeable blather to exclaim, "If this isn't nice, I don't know what is." Vonnegut continues, "So I do the same now, and so do my kids and grandkids. And I urge you to please notice when you are happy, and exclaim or murmur or think at some point, 'If this isn't nice, I don't know what is.'" At some point in the last 15 years, I seem to have gotten this quote mixed up in my head somehow with a line from another of Vonnegut's books, Cat's Cradle, a line from a fictitious piece of scripture called the 53rd Calypso. It goes like this: "Nice, nice, very nice." So this is the refrain I have chosen for noticing the happy moments in my life, moments which are perhaps nothing to write home about, but which bring me an almost irrational amount of joy. Nice, nice, very nice. But getting back to Alan Watts for a second, he was the one who was saying that our world of ever-increasing stimulation, distraction, and speed was making us less and less sensitive to the most acute and subtle joys of life, which are actually quite common and simple, examples of which we have just seen thanks to Chen Sheng-ten and Kurt Vonnegut. So, according to Watts, if we want to become sensitive to these common and simple joys, seeking more and more stimulation is a dead end. It's actually a dead end in the wrong direction. He points out that if our minds are fixated on securing some kind of guarantee of future fun, sustenance, or safety, we will almost certainly miss these happy moments, even though, ironically, they are what we've been chasing after. So, preoccupation with the future, or trying to hold on to some past happiness, are both going to distract us from noticing these acute and subtle joys. Okay, but what are we supposed to do? Just stop planning for the future and completely dismiss the past? Just drift along like a tumbleweed in the wind? In that same book, The Wisdom of Insecurity, Alan Watts says that the art of living is, quote, neither careless drifting on the one hand, nor fearful clinging to the past on the other. It consists in being completely sensitive to each moment, in regarding it as utterly new and unique, in having the mind open and wholly receptive. A really beautiful and inspiring portrayal of this way of moving through the modern world can be found in Wim Wenders's movie Perfect Days, which came out in 2023. It's set in the present day, and it's about a fictitious man in Tokyo who lives a quiet life and follows a simple routine, cleaning public restrooms for a living and reading paperback books before falling asleep on a floor mattress in his tiny apartment every night. He takes pleasure in growing saplings cut from larger trees, eating his lunch in a quiet garden, listening to music on cassette tapes in his van, and visiting the same restaurant daily. Quite often, as you can imagine, he is interrupted while cleaning a public toilet by someone who needs to use it, and he quickly takes his leave and stands outside the restroom. But instead of being frustrated or annoyed, as I'm pretty sure I would be, he appears to find humor in the situation every time. This feather-light attitude seems to lead his eyes naturally upward, toward the leaves of the trees overhead, rustling, swaying, and filtering sunlight. As he stares up at them, he smiles to himself. I love this movie because it suggests that it is possible to live within modernity, in an urban setting even, yet to cultivate a certain peace of mind that we might only associate with life in a monastery or in a secluded cabin in the woods. Many of us have daydreamed, I'm sure, about escaping to a simpler way of life, but it just doesn't seem possible for so many reasons. So, how can we live like Hirayama, the protagonist in the movie, staying where we are but becoming more acutely aware of simple pleasures? There are so many possible answers to that question, but I think the first thing we have to do is to come to our senses. The word anesthesia is in common usage, but we don't really use the word aesthesia. It is a real word, and it just means to be able to perceive sensations. When a person has undergone surgery and their anesthesia is wearing off, and they are regaining consciousness, we say that they are coming to their senses. This state of being could be called aesthesia, and we might assume that it is our default wakeful state. But how long does it take after the surgery patient has come to their senses for their intellectual programs to reload, for them to leave their senses once again and start worrying and planning for the future and fretting over the past? That is the default state for most of us. Sometimes I wonder what the opposite of anesthesia would be. Something that would induce a state of being able to perceive sensations, an aesthetic as opposed to an anesthetic. Something that could jolt us out of our preoccupied/post-occupied stupor. Something that awakens the part of ourselves that precedes or underlies thinking, judging, planning, and remembering. The animal part, if you will. I hope I'm not stepping on any philosophical, psychological, or medical toes here with this terminology. I just want to consider a word, a concept that we are all relatively familiar with, and play with it in a way that helps us to see the world around us, to wake up to it. I'm trying to conjure that vision that Emily Webb had of her life, but without having to die first. To realize Earth, as she put it. Well, as Thornton Wilder put it, really. And he was alive, so there's hope for us. Anyway, back to my question. What might an aesthetic be as opposed to an anesthetic? I think there are aesthetics all around us. Sights, sounds, and fragrances that cause us to return to our senses after being miles away. In our world, though, these things are easy to miss. Bright, loud, fast-paced content that's been painstakingly engineered to grab our attention and hold it for as long as possible doesn't really return us to our senses. It's designed to take us out of ourselves. It makes us unaware and insensitive to our surroundings. The things that can return us to our senses are, at least by contrast, slow and subtle. They're found in nature. They're also found in art, as well as in everyday life. But let's start with nature. It could be a mountainous landscape, or just a tree in the middle of a city. It could be the sky, in day or night, a bird song, the fur of your pet, a carrot pulled straight out of the dirt. We can either dismiss these miracles as boring, basic, predictable, part of the background of our lives, or we can give them a chance to act on us as aesthetics, bringing us to our senses. We can linger in their presence, maybe putting a hand on the rough bark of the tree, smelling the carrot and then tasting it, not just hearing but listening to the bird like it's singing a song we want to learn. I don't know about you, but I find it a lot easier to come to my senses than to be in the moment, even though those are essentially two ways of saying the same thing. We've all heard that we should stop worrying so much and just be in the moment and enjoy the little things. But how? What does it mean to be in the moment? How do you just switch on enjoyment? It's not as obvious or easy as people make it sound. But what I seem to always be able to do is to feel the weight of my body sitting in this chair, or to hear an airplane flying overhead, or to smell the simmering garlic. And when I bring my attention to these things, I am, however temporarily, not anywhere other than right here. In other words, I'm in the moment. My brain is in a restful state, even if just for a flash. I think of our senses as a tiny peephole that we always have the option of either blowing right past or looking through. They're always available to us, at least when we're awake and not undergoing surgery. But if we've been consuming a diet of digital entertainment, the real world might seem, to our eyes, a bit drab, even though, in reality, it's 1,000 times more vibrant than anything your phone could ever show you. It might be a good time to give our senses a tune-up. One way to do this is to employ the new 5-second rule I described in the last episode, where you just stay with whatever strikes you as beautiful for 5 seconds, rather than immediately moving on. Another possible tune-up is something I call the background effect. You can do this in an art museum, or you can do it at home, or at work, or while riding the subway. When you walk into a room or look at a painting or even some poster art, your eye is usually drawn somewhere, whether it's a navy blue couch in the middle of the room or the figure of a woman in the foreground of a painting. You can't really help it. That's just where your eyes go. Okay, so after that initial response, try looking just beside the object, at the background. Look as long as you can stand it. See if you can almost drink the color and texture in through your eyes, even if it's just beige or white. White is a color, after all. Try to see it as such. You're not trying to have any deep thoughts about it. You're just trying to see it. Once you feel you've seen it, shift your eyes back to the object that initially drew your attention and see if it doesn't look a little different now after your quick tune-up. I love the distinction the contemporary philosopher Byung-Chul Han makes between leisure and laziness. In our culture, leisure and laziness are seen as practically identical. Both would imply not doing anything productive, not contributing to society, as it were. The only difference might be that a typical overworked, overscheduled modern person might insist that leisure is something they cannot afford, whereas laziness is something they would never admit. Laziness is shameful. Leisure is a luxury. But both are seen as idleness, something our puritanical roots steer us sharply away from. But Byung-Chul Han sees laziness and leisure as fundamentally different. He says, leisure is not the neighbor of lazy inactivity. It is its opposite. It does not serve the purpose of distraction, but of collecting oneself. Lingering presupposes a gathering of the senses. I like this phrase, gathering of the senses. While it's not possible to think about two things at once, we are almost certainly sensing everything at once, just not consciously, like how your ears are sensing sounds even as you sleep. If you take a moment, you can almost become aware of what you're seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and feeling all at once. Almost. But even getting close prepares you for something you might not otherwise be able to do, and that is to linger, to stay with an experience, with a person, with yourself, for a little longer, even when it does not directly serve a purpose. We might call it being in your body. When you're in your body, you can stay. When you're in your head, you feel a compulsion to move on. There's a whole world that opens up to us when we're in this state, when we finally stop looking at the clock and planning our exit strategy, when we can linger with a friend over a drink and really taste what we're eating right now. One positive outcome of being in this state is the potential it brings for real conversation. And when I say conversation, I don't mean catching up over a quick coffee or the mere airing of complaints and worries. I'm talking about a free-ranging, spontaneous delight, full of humor and maybe even occasionally touching on wisdom. If you think about it, it makes sense that a society that upholds busyness and haste as signs of virtue would be necessarily impoverished when it comes to the art of conversation. Comparing Chinese and American culture in the 1930s, the Chinese writer Lin Yutang says that conversation only exists in a society of men imbued with the spirit of leisure, with its ease, its humor, and its appreciation of light nuances. Already in the 1930s, the faster pace of life and the dominance of business in American culture were eating away at the art of conversation. If you are lucky enough to know someone who was alive in the 1930s and 40s, consider having a leisurely conversation with them, if possible. They probably at least partially learned to converse from people who were alive in the 1800s. You could be helping to carry on an art form. Plus, it's hard to think of something we need more right now than the ability to genuinely connect with people different from us and the appreciation of light nuances. But having a great conversation is just one of the many possibilities that arise from gathering our senses. Another obvious one is the ability to enjoy things, to enjoy life in general. The more sensitive we become, the less we are in constant need of stimulation and distraction, and the more attuned we are to the things like the 33 Happy Moments of Chen Shengtan and Emily Webb's Greatest Hits of Life. But I'm guessing, if you're listening to this podcast, you don't really need to be convinced of the importance or validity of slowing down and tuning in. The question is, how do we do it? There are so many possible, delicious ways of answering that question, but I'm going to end this episode where we began, with the humble orange. This is a way to practice gathering your senses, to give you a single object on which to lavish your attention. One single object that can offer something to each of the 5 senses. So if you can, grab the nearest navel orange or mandarin, perhaps the one your kid didn't eat at school today. Or you can just imagine. You have it? Okay, got mine too. If you can just forget for a moment that this particular miracle of nature can be bought with mere pocket change, and if you can forget that you've seen a fruit that looks just like this thousands of times before, and if you can forget the numerous counterfeit orange flavors you've been subjected to throughout your life, then perhaps you will truly experience an orange for the first time. Before touching it, feast your eyes on its appearance, the nearly perfect sphere of it, the tiny dimples, the vivid hue so alluring, by the way, that multiple cultures named a whole spectrum of colors after it. In Old English, for instance, before the arrival of this fruit from the East, the word for this color was just yellow-red. The etymology of the word orange, and the word for orange in other languages, is actually really interesting. But for now, it is sufficient to say that this fruit made a huge impression on people, and consequently on language, and consequently on our understanding of our world. Anyway, you can pick it up now. It's probably cool to the touch, and the texture of the skin is not like anything else, except other citrus fruits, of course. You can feel the weight of it in your hand. Maybe you toss it back and forth a few times. Now, whether you choose to peel it by hand or bisect it with a knife, notice what happens when you first pierce the skin. If you have good light, you'll be able to see the oils escaping in a fine mist. Take a few seconds to smell this dazzling fragrance. Continue in this way, tasting the sweet juice, listening to the crackle of the peel as you tear it away, noticing the internal architecture of the sections, those little pockets of juice just waiting to burst, the squish of the white pulp. Notice not only how it tastes, but also how the orange feels in your mouth. Maybe you can even feel the orange in your stomach. Take a moment to see if you can sense the orange in multiple ways at once. If you've gathered your senses in this way, then you have glimpsed a portal through which a vivid awareness of life becomes possible. From this place, it becomes possible to linger, to enjoy, to listen, to love and connect, to pay attention, and to contemplate. And I want to point out that the quality of the orange itself is hardly relevant to this exercise. Unless it's actually rotten, a subpar orange presents the same opportunity to gather one's senses as does a premium one. A dry orange still has juice in it. A pale orange still has a color. And in fact, training ourselves to notice, to become aware of the less sweet, less vibrant oranges in life, may actually heighten our sensitivity to the really good ones. This is just the beginning. Support for First Creatures comes from our listeners. A special thank you to Teresa Gold, Raymond Ryan, and Andy King. I'm so grateful to have your support. To learn about how you can support the podcast, visit firstcreatures.com. New episodes come out each month, so be sure to follow the show, and thank you for listening.